Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hi, this is Tammy Patzer, and I am happy that I have Grace Brannigan on the show today. Grace is the author of, listen up, more than 100 novels, journals, sketchbooks, and of course, our topic today is coloring books. So I want you to listen because Grace has probably more experience than anyone I've talked to date. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. I'm really excited. So let's get right into it. Tell me, how in the world did you get involved, number one, in the coloring book or adult coloring book industry? And give me a little overview of your obviously very prolific talent.
Well, I've been a writer for many years, and I've also interwoven my career and my personal life with art. So the writing, the art kind of like meshed together, and about a year ago, which would have been April last year, 2015, I was working on some mandala art books that I had created off of actually my photographs. I manipulated them and I made mandalas. And then I started seeing all this information, these news stories about adult coloring books. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, that's like really fascinating. So I started researching just to see what they meant by adult coloring books. I mean, you know, as kids we're used to a certain type of coloring book years ago, dogs, animals, things that are simple for kids to draw. But then I'm seeing all these mandalas, absolutely gorgeous line drawings. And I'm like, you know what? I think I could do that if I could figure it out. I know some art programs, very preliminary, very basic art programs, graphic design, and I'm still always learning. So I didn't have a lot of background. I've never actually had any. It's all kind of self-taught. So what I did know, I'm going to try to figure out how to make these mandalas because these look really, really neat, and they're, you can do as intricate or as simple design as you like. So that's where I started. And the more that I started seeing more and more stories about adult coloring books, I'm like, wow, you can do other things too. So then I started to look at, because I actually have a collection from about 1890s, 1900s of vintage era postcards that were in my family. And I said to myself, well, this would be a really cool idea too, to put out some coloring books based on vintage postcards. And those were more in the realm of grayscale, which was, so then I had to find like the perfect, what I thought of as the perfect shading, wasn't too dark, wasn't too light, that people might like to color, because I found it kind of fascinating myself to the idea of coloring in. So I had these colored old postcards, and I desaturated them, which essentially I was taking all the color out, and you're left with black and white or like a grayscale type picture. And that's kind of like where I started. And then as time went on, I looked on Facebook and I started seeing coloring book, author support and coloring book groups. So from there, it just kind of took hold. And as I go on, I just keep seeing something might give me an idea, and I'm like, wow, that might be a cool coloring book. How could I make that happen?
Wow. So are those postcards, would those fall under the public domain?
Yes, they're all essentially late 1800s to about 1901.
Okay, because that's actually a very good tip about, well, where can you get ideas and where can you find images, and the public domain obviously is a really good place to look.
Yeah, and also I had found a website that the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands keeps, and they had digitized public domain images. And even though on their site it states that, you can use them however you want, commercially, whatever, I did email them to make sure it was okay. And then I created, from old engravings, the Baroque era, around the 1500s, I used some of their alphabets that were turned into engravings at that time. And I told them that I was going to do that. And they asked that after the book was published that I send them a copy for their museum library. So they had, a copy of it. And I also sourced from the Rijksmuseum this was in the Renaissance era, a collection of masks, which were kind of interesting. Very, they had a lot of embellishments and flourishes. And I used those in a coloring book also. And again, I sent them a copy of the book so they had it for their museum. So that was a really nice source. And those, again, were grayscale images. And
that
they
sounds
seem
really
to go over,
good.
Yeah, they seem to go over really well. People seem to like, the masks are very unusual. And the alphabets are too, because they also have a lot of embellishments and curly cues, and it's kind of a neat type of art that was done way back when. And thanks to the Rijksmuseum, digitizing those images and making them available to the public. So there was 2 coloring books in that manner that I created.
And I will include in the show notes the name of this museum, so if somebody wants to go take a look at what is there, they can go find that online. You also do some really unique things with grayscaling photographs and doing like Scenics and Iceland and old cars. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, actually, the grayscale using my photographs that I've taken are what I'm really, really enjoying right now, and I'm kind of concentrating on that. I live actually in upstate New York in the Catskill Mountains, and it's an absolutely gorgeous scenic area. And I had all these photographs, and I'm like, this would make a really nice coloring because this is something that would, people would like to color. So I started with the Scenic Catskill Mountains, 25 photographs to color, and I played around with the grayscale, desaturating them, and then trying to make it, again, not too light, not too dark. And then what I did was, after I put the first book together, I was looking at it, and I'm like, well, I have to start coloring these so people can see that you can really do a nice job and have something that looks really different if you enjoy landscapes. So that was the first one, and then the next one I did was Scenic Catskill Mountains, lakes and streams. So I had a lot of waterfalls, lakes, streams, and then actually I went to Iceland several months ago, and I took like 1,000 pictures. And when I came back, I was looking at them. So I was like, well, maybe I could make an Iceland in winter, Scenic Iceland in winter. And it's all basically glaciers and geothermal fields. And it is kind of, these type of books with nature and the landscapes might be considered more for an advanced colorist, or anyone actually who might, want to look on this as a new challenge because it's different than a lot of the coloring books you see out there. And what I also include in these nature coloring books is the actual full color photographs. So people can look at it. They don't necessarily have to follow it, but they can look at it and say, oh, okay, well, that gives me kind of an idea of what color the water should be. You've got the reflection of the clouds in the water. So it gives you a guideline to follow. And then the next one I did was, well, after the Iceland one, was reflections. And this is all about water and ice and reflections in the ice, which, again, would be maybe something a little specialized, people that would enjoy coloring reflections on ice and water.
Wow, you really have an eclectic bunch of different books, but I think that's probably why people would collect what you create. So you use a lot of computer. Do you also hand draw or what is the, would you say is your primary method of creating these books?
Well, basically, I'm manipulating my photographs in a in a computer program. At this point, I'm actually not hand drawing any of my design, which is kind of interesting to me because I also hand dye art on silk, and they're all hand drawn. But for some reason, I really enjoy the photographs and manipulating them to use in the coloring books. So that's where I'm at right now, and I don't know. I don't have any desire at this point to actually hand draw them. I'm just focused on my photographs and, putting out the best product I can as far as, okay, is this something somebody would really say, wow, I'd love to reproduce, something similar in a landscape, in a seascape, or lakes or streams or waterfalls. So it can be a little challenging. But if it's something that someone maybe wants to color and then hang on their wall, it's very doable.
That's cool. So would you say that you have a lot of multiple themes or a certain type of theme in your books?
My books are all over. They're all, the ones I'm doing right now, the nature ones, are all kind of in a series. They're outdoors, mountains, glaciers, lakes, streams, ocean. So they're all kind of nature related. And for right now, that's what I'm focusing on. And then I have my other books that some are vintage, some are mandalas that were purely done on my computer in my graphic program. So I'm kind of like all over the place. But at this point, I really want to focus on the grayscale, which I began doing the grayscale nature books in the fall. And I had noticed, because that's why I was like, oh, is this something anybody's going to want to do? Because there weren't really, at that point, a lot of grayscale books. There were, I think, 3 or 4 that I actually saw as coloring books on Amazon. So that's, at that point, is when I started saying, I'm going to put it out there, and just see what happens. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So
now,
you're ahead of the curve in terms of grayscale.
Actually, the one I saw, which probably most people are familiar with, is Beautiful Creatures. And the lady who did that, the artist had done all grayscale animals. And I'm like, oh, that's a neat idea. I wonder if I can translate that to landscapes. So she was the one, I think, kind of brought notice to grayscale. She began it in the fall, I want to say. And then now I think there's a lot more people doing grayscale. But yeah, the whole idea just totally intrigued me. And I'm like, if I can produce a photograph that's light enough that people would enjoy coloring, it's like visiting the Catskills. Here you've got beautiful scenery and you can, color it and maybe frame it if you like it.
Well, when you think about it, with coloring, obviously you have, if you look back at how coloring came about, or it was like connect the dots or line drawings, and then as adults, line drawings, and then now the grayscale images. And the themes are really, you're only limited by the imagination of the artist in terms of the types of coloring books that could be produced. So when you're thinking about your coloring books, obviously these are targeting to adults, but I imagine a lot of what you've done children can use, or groups, or have you ever had any of your books used in party or group coloring?
Well, I've been asked by my local library to do some coloring events, like a little get-together. And it was very nice of them to. That was early on when I first started. So what I did was I printed out a lot of pages, and then, of course, I had my coloring books there, too. And we had a pretty good turnout, about 30 people or so, adults and children. So I found, even though I was gearing it toward adults, I found there were some children that really enjoyed coloring the mandalas, the alphabets, the maths in my vintage post coloring books. So it was kind of like going across the spectrum of ages, and I was, as I said, surprised that younger kids enjoyed doing it too, because some of the stuff was really intricate. So I don't make any assumptions anymore. If someone really wants to try it and enjoy it, then, that's great. And they do want me to do more events at the library. The thing is, I'm pretty proactive about getting my stuff out there as best I can, but I'm not at this point doing a lot of marketing, which I see a lot of people on Facebook, they're giving away, which is fine. They're giving away free images and stuff. I just don't do that. And there's so much stuff about it, copyright infringement and whatnot. But I just prefer I make these videos and I show all the images, and if people are interested enough, and if I had, I'm trying to get some more colorists on board. If I had colorists that were interested in doing, coloring the images, then I would supply them with the images and then have them post them on social media. So it's an ongoing thing, trying to find new avenues to get yourself out there and get a little noticed. But I'm not really aggressive right now on the marketing aspect.
So do you think that what do you think is actually driving the coloring book craze right now?
From what I've read, and from actually, I was talking to someone who used to work in a psychiatric center, and she was saying, we've been doing this for years. Sometimes we'll give patients like a coloring book or puzzles or something to solve, and it really helps. It helps them focus, and it offers some kind of stress relief. I mean, you see that all over, but she said this is stuff that we've known for years. And now that there's so much available in the coloring book market, it seems to be other people are finding out, about it. And myself, I colored a little bit when I was a kid. I wasn't really big into it, but kind of being a self-taught artist through the years, I like to watercolor. So I find myself, you really do, when you're really into drawing coloring one of these coloring books, you really are focusing, and then time slips by a little bit, and it does offer something, some sense of accomplishment, and it for myself, I don't know if it provides any stress relief because I'm not under a lot of stress, but it's just that focus, and then when you see your completed work, it's like, wow, and it just feels really good. That's the way I can explain it. And all these articles I see, and you see in some really good big publications about the stress relief and meditative quality to coloring. Obviously, there's got to be something behind it, and people are just, enjoying it, even if it's just to create something. And creating something is always, in my mind, a really phenomenal experience.
So, talk a little about. I know it's kind of an odd question, but maybe you might offer some ideas about I don't want to really say best ways, but different ways to color that people may not have thought about.
Okay, so once I started getting into this, I was reading a lot on what people on the Facebook coloring groups, what people are using to color, and I was really surprised because years ago, you used crayons, when we were kids. So now, and also for my silk business, my art on silk business, I had purchased Derwent Inktense colored pencils, and I was using them on silk, and then I found out people were using them on coloring books, so I started coloring with these, and they have kind of a soft lead, if you will, and they're art pencils, and they color very nicely on grayscale. And right now, they're my favorite because you can not only color them, if you choose, you can also take what they call a water brush, it's a brush that has in the channel a little bit of water, and you can squeeze it, and then it has a brush on the end. And I use a barely damp brush, and sometimes after you color with the Derwent Inktense watercolor pencils, you can go over it with a brush, and it gives it a little more and even a little more intensity in color by adding that little bit of dampness, and then you let it dry. All my coloring books are created on CreateSpace, which is a print-on-demand service associated with Amazon. And the paper is okay. It's, I think, 60-pound, and it's a little bit thicker in my books because my Grayscale nature books, I use the coloring option, which means the pages are a tiny bit thicker, as opposed to just printing it on black and white option. So it colors very nicely. Obviously, you can't go in there with like a regular paintbrush and just slather, colors on. If you do, you have to be very, very careful with the water. Very, very careful. But I've had some nice results, which I started making videos of some of my nature books that I've colored. And I also like Prismacolor watercolor pencils, which, again, you can just color with them and leave it at that, or you can use a damp water brush afterwards to kind of intensify the colors. And one other way that I do, because I've been experimenting, is I bought something called Clear Gesso, Gesso, on Amazon, and I treat the paper. In other words, I take a paintbrush and brush on the Clear Gesso on the paper first. It adds a little bit of protection, and then when you use the colored pencils, it gives it more what they call tooth. It has a little more gripping power, and the colors seem to be even more intense by treating the paper first. So I've tried it all different ways. And then on my Grayscale, like my vintage postcard ones, I've used big permanent markers. They work really great, and they have really nice bright colors. I really don't use crayons per se. I've tried the twistable crayons. Those seem to work better than the other crayons I had. And I also have glitter pens and gel pens, and they have a really fine end. So if you have some detail you want to fill in, they work really nice. And I've also found that if I do like a vintage postcard image with the permanent markers, and then on top sometimes I'll use the glitter pens to highlight something. But there are so many different types of implements you can use to color. But those are my favorites, are the colored pencils by Derwent Inktense and Prismacolor, and the Bic permanent markers are really nice.
I think the advice on putting the Clear Gesso over the paper first is that's something I have not heard before, and I think that actually is pretty good advice, because then you're actually adding a protective layer to the artwork and probably making that paper a little more solid or easier to work with. That's really interesting. So do you think that this adult coloring book is just a fad, or is it here to stay? What's your take on that?
Just from what I've seen, I think it'll continue to be, whether it's a fad or not, I think it could be a long-standing fad, as long as people are still interested in coloring, and there's always going to be new images. And if people are finding stress release or enjoyment in this type of art, then I think it could just keep on going.
I think you're right, because you just said it, that there's always going to be new images to color. And I also think that people like to collect different books. I know I have some art. I have a coloring book, an adult coloring book that was done like in the 80s that I have carried across the country at least 3 times, and I still have it because I put value in it for some reason. So let's go ahead and talk about the business side or the marketing side of the coloring books. You touched on it a little bit. For example, locally, you could start setting up coloring parties at the local library, and of course, give away free coloring pages, but then have your books there for sale. That could be something that you could do. You've done quite a bit online, so go ahead and talk about that.
Well, I had my my author page, gracebrannigan.com, and then when I started producing the coloring books and there seemed to be a lot of interest, then I decided to have a domain primarily for the coloring books to direct people that way, because I had decided I was going to focus some advertising on just the coloring books at this time. So I created a URL, coloringbooksforadults.info, and I have all my coloring books up there. And I have also listed, I do Goodreads, the Goodreads community. I do Goodreads giveaways, so I have that listed on my website. And I have at the bottom, usually I have 4, at any given time I have 4 giveaways going. Like I might have a novel, and then right now I have a novel giveaway on Goodreads, and I also have one of my writing journals that have my mandalas on them, and then I have 2 coloring books that I have giveaways going right now. So that's one avenue, and Goodreads I've found is pretty good about. I do very. I think it's like $50 a month, so it's like $1 something a day that I do in advertising on Goodreads, and it gets it in front of eyeballs. It gets the ads. I have almost all my books I have set up as ads on Goodreads, and they rotate it. And obviously, you're not going to get a lot of hits for $1 something a day, but they send you the stats, and you can see what people are looking at on the ads. You can see which ones they're looking at, which ones they clicked on, which ones they added to their library to look at later or purchase later or read later. So that combined, the advertising combined with the Goodreads giveaways, I think has resulted in quite a few nice reviews. I only do, in the beginning I used to do on Goodreads, to everywhere in the world, but because unfortunately postage has gotten so expensive, it's pretty much for a regular size coloring book, and my coloring books are mostly 11 by 8.5, though I do have some pocket size ones. But the regular big size coloring books are like outside the U.S. they're generally at least $11 to mail out for one. So I am at this point limiting the contest giveaway to the United States, and I usually give away 2 to 5 books. Right now I'm doing 2. I started off with 5. And it seems to result in, out of the 2, maybe 1 review. Out of the 5 I used to do, it was still about 1 review. And sometimes that's on Amazon. Sometimes they'll go to Amazon and leave a review. And primarily the reviews are on Goodreads, which I have actually more reviews on Goodreads. I think I have like 400, as opposed to Amazon, where it's probably half that amount for my books. So that's one avenue that I think is really good to have a presence on Goodreads. I've also tried Google Ads, Google AdWords, and it's kind of, in a way, kind of complicated. You really have to keep on top of what is, what is trending as far as keywords, and then you have to keep an eye on your ads and see how much you want to spend. So it's kind of an art in itself, doing any kind of ad. But I've had some success with the Google AdWords, and I've also tried Facebook ads. I generally, if I start a new, if I put up a new coloring book, I'll boost on my Facebook page. I also have a coloring book for adults info. That's my Facebook page. I also will boost a post for a couple days, just kind of, give it a boost and get people seeing, this is a new book, here's some of the images, and I always make videos of the new book so people can see what's in the images are inside. And then I have videos of all the books, and I put those up on, I have a YouTube channel, Grace Brannigan Author, and I think I have 40-something videos up on there, and people can go on there and look and see, what I've got, and the images, and the covers, and the information about where to find me. So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. As I think I mentioned earlier, I know a lot of people give away free images on Facebook, and I just decided early on, and it's probably because I've been in the self-publishing industry for quite a while, and there's so much things being kind of misappropriated. I just chose early on not to give away free images, and that's just my personal choice. So other than that, that's kind of like where I'm at right now. I do belong to a lot of coloring books, and it's a little difficult, though, to keep up on everything. And you have to kind of choose your priorities, what you think might be working right now, and kind of focus on that. As far as social media, I do have a Twitter presence. It's at Coloring Adults. And when I write on my WordPress blog, it automatically posts to my Twitter. So that's something I do like maybe twice a month. I post to my blog. It's gracebrannigan.wordpress.com, and I'll post, some of the latest information about what's going on with my coloring books.
I think what you just described, and I'm hoping that the listeners download this and they go back to this part about your marketing, because basically what you are doing is you're creating this massive digital presence, and you've done enough research so that you realize Goodreads is working for you, and you're not expecting a lot of sales as much as you're expecting that your reviews are going to increase, which of course the reviews are going to help you to get more people to recognize you, especially if your reviews are good. And then of course you're growing that online presence in everything you do. And then of course you have the videos so people can see. They don't need the free images because you're showing them what they can get. And I know that when I went to your website, I looked at some of the videos and I looked at the images, and I saw that you also showed some samples of what they look like colored. And it was
right.
like my level of I want that went up. So I know that what you're doing is actually what you described as a very phenomenal, simple marketing plan that almost any author could use, or any business person for that matter, because you're using what I would call content brand marketing. So I have a question about making coloring books. If I wanted to create coloring books, and let's say I'm going to use Create Space and take your marketing advice, do I need to be an artist to do this?
I really think you have to have an artistic vision. You just have to have, a mindset where, okay, this is something I'm really interested in creating. How can I go about it? And whether you draw the images yourself or you photograph and use your own images in that way. Sometimes people hire illustrators or photographers to do what they have in mind. I think, it's the old thing. If you have a will, there's a way. If there's something you really feel passionate about creating, then I don't think you have to be what you might call a traditional artist, where you can actually draw it out yourself. But in some way, I think you can get that idea down on paper and create something that other people are going to like. And I know a lot of people do research about what they think the market is going to absolutely love. And my mindset is a little bit different in that if I really feel that I love it, and I'm like, well, let me just put it out there. There's got to be at least one or two other people that might like it. And, what have you got to lose? Create Space is a wonderful idea, a wonderful platform in that it's essentially not going to cost you anything to put it out there. Obviously you want to do your best effort, and then, but, be brave. Sometimes people sit on it and they worry about it, and they're like, well, what if nobody else likes it? What if it doesn't sell? Whatever. You just have to take that step and say, no matter what happens, I did the best I could, and I'm putting it out there.
I really like that. So be brave. Don't let the fear stop you from creating anything. And again, that goes for anything that you want to do in life. Don't let the fear factor or that nagging little voice inside your head saying that you're not good enough or it's not perfect stop you from getting it out there. And I agree, Create Space does open up a whole new world for people to create not only coloring books, but any type of book in print. And then, of course, there's also the Kindle factor for people who do text type books. So is there anything, I'm really interested in this because you seem to be very prolific. And how do you keep being prolific on a regular basis? What's the big secret?
I don't know that there's any secret. It's just that I guess I have a good imagination, but I could just be going down the road and see something, see a picture, see an image, or read a story online and think, oh, that would be a good idea for a coloring book. How can I make that happen? So then it starts, it starts churning in your head about, okay, how can I do this? How can I plan this? So I just think if you keep yourself open to, whatever, and even if there's somebody out there already doing it, nobody's is going to be identical because everybody has their own idea how to actually get it into, the visual. So even if somebody has something that you're like, oh man, I've been thinking about that, I sat on it and somebody else did it, there's always going to be your own interpretation. So yeah, just go ahead and, let the creativity flow. And I can't explain how I get these ideas. They just come. So I can't give you a concrete anything on that. But
I think the message that you provided today is perfect in every way. It's go ahead and do it. Get it published, create it, and make something and see where it goes from there. Where can we find out more information about you and your books and services?
Well, if you go to my website, that has essentially links to, all my different videos and Amazon page, and you can see the book covers and everything, and my Goodreads giveaways. So that's www.coloringbooksforadults.info. It's not the .com. It's coloringbooksforadults.info.
Great. And I will include live links in the show notes. Grace, thank you so much. I learned so much from talking to you today.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And of course, any information that we can put out there to kind of educate people, especially how to color, using different coloring tools, I think it's a great idea. And I think it's a great idea that you're focusing on coloring books.
Great. Thank you. This is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.